I wanted to address today the topic of loneliness. Loneliness. Um, I was researching something a few months ago, probably for a BBC, but I came across an article by George F. Will, who is a very well-known conservative columnist. I've followed him for years, actually. He's really helped me see the conservative point of view. This is a column in the Washington Post titled, "We Have an Epidemic of Loneliness, How Can We Fix It?" And he was reviewing a book by Republican Senator Ben Sasse from Nebraska. The book is called Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal. So it being a time that we're coming up to the winter holidays where this issue, loneliness, comes up, we're going into a 3-month silent retreat where people's issues of loneliness come up. I thought it would be just interesting to explore this from a couple of perspectives. So first, to look at how George Will quoted Ben Sasse's article. He says, the nation's most discussed political problem is entangled with its least understood public health problem. The political problem is furious partisanship. No argument there. The public health problem is loneliness. And in his view, the partisanship is a result of the loneliness in our culture and people looking for something to hang on to be a part of. He cites that loneliness in epidemic proportions. So some of these statistics are interesting. He said there's a growing consensus that loneliness, not obesity, cancer, or heart disease, is the nation's #1 health crisis. Persistent loneliness reduces average longevity more than twice as much as heavy drinking does, and more than 3 times as much as obesity, which is often a consequence of loneliness. Research demonstrates that loneliness is as physically dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's intense. And contributes to cognitive decline, including more rapid advance of Alzheimer's disease. I think research has really supported that. Sasse says we're literally dying of despair, of the failure to fill the hole millions of Americans feel in their lives. So it's an interesting premise, really an interesting premise, and I don't think far off than what other people are kind of assuming. No, so he's got some interesting ideas about the why. One idea is that, in the 1950s, 70% of all households were tuned into the same sitcom, so we had a cultural similarity. I mean, I Love Lucy, what does that mean for how our minds develop? But that's a whole other topic. But as today, Hannity is the most watched show, and it has 1% of the US population. The median American checking a smartphone every 4.3 minutes. That's the average. We're looking for something, pecking at something, right? Today, one reason the average American lifespan has declined for 3 consecutive years is that many more are dying of drug overdoses. We know that too. The disease of despair annually kills more people than during the entire Vietnam War. I assume he means Americans. That would be my guess. So someone asked His Holiness, why? What's the cause of loneliness? He did not cite lack of I Love Lucy. His Holiness says, it's mainly mental. Of course he said that. And then in this teaching, when someone asked him this question, he launched into a story that I've heard him tell. I think he tells this many times. He tells a story about once in Spain, he met a monk who had been living as a hermit for 5 years, meditating in complete isolation. And when His Holiness asked him, what kind of practice did you do? The monk told him, I meditated on love. And when he said this, His Holiness says the loving kindness coming from his eyes, the delight, was clear and evident. He says, so He literally spent such a long time alone, yet meditating on love, he never felt loneliness. Then His Holiness says, just think of our self-centered attitude with no idea of love. Then competitiveness comes, which brings jealousy. Competition brings fear, which is mistrust. He said, no, lonely feeling is not the creation of the environment, but it's the creation of our own mental attitude. And of course, there's a big difference between being lonely and being alone. And that's, I think when we start to face loneliness in our society, or as the holidays come up and we feel like, all the things that come up when people don't feel close to their families, or they don't feel like they have the friendship that they want and so forth. Or here, we're separated from our families over the holidays. Some people probably may still have those kind of lingering, or maybe mom's still calling, I wish you were home for Christmas, that little bit of a hook. But loneliness is not the same thing as being alone. And we can cultivate a mind of tremendous love like this monk, whether we're around people or not. So some of the antidotes. So what are some of the antidotes we can look at when these feelings of loneliness come up? Somewhere, I'm not sure where I was reading this, but it's like this idea that, I know, it's this. One of the incarcerated people that Venerable Children corresponds with was talking about his loneliness. And he says this idea that from reaching from the outside to fill up this emptiness, this hole inside, is part of what took him to prison. Trying to be popular, trying to have people like him, using people to fill that need, that's what took him to prison itself. And yet, as Holiness is saying, it's not outside. You cannot fill it from the outside. We have to do it from the inside. So here's just a few antidotes that came to mind. Also, I was looking at, what Venerable Children has said about it. But one of the principal things is to meditate on the kindness of others, which I think is probably, I don't know. For me, I think it's the most important daily meditation we can do for our sanity, to keep us, sane, and realizing that the stories we tell ourselves about I'm not loved, or nobody cares about me, or people are trying to harm me, or whatever our self-centered thought habit is constructing and running as our inner monologue, the more we meditate on the kindness of others, the more we recognize that that story cannot possibly be true. Even if we just start looking at the beginning of our lives and think about how much support we have received, how we got through school, how we got to school in the first place, how we managed to stay fed and managed to stay clothed, managed to stay warm enough to stay alive, managed to get educated, managed to get to wherever we are in our lives today. And then we look around and see direct physical support from other beings. Some we know, some we don't know. That's even without getting into the more abstract meditation on the kindness of others as we track the people who grow our food, the people who built our tables, the people who built our computer. But as we begin to do this kind of reflection again and again and again and again, we see that indeed, if there's loneliness there, it's because we're not open. We're not looking at all that is coming our way, all the love that is there. And then, of course, doing the metta meditation ourselves, like that monk, meditating on developing love. So we see love when we offer it, right? The more we offer it, the more we are receptive to it. And of course, sort of a logical extension, all this can't be our motivation, is that generally people respond to love with some receptivity. His Holiness, in part of this question, he said, I always consider myself just another human being, so I have a sense of belonging wherever I go. He says that every time. I have a sense of belonging wherever I go, wherever I meet people. And he says, if there is a genuine human smile, that is the most important. Not a sarcastic smile, not a diplomatic smile, he said, but a genuine human smile. And I love to see that. And then when I have that, it brings deep comfort. So even the practice of smiling at one another, smiling at the people in our lives, can evoke that kind of response. And when we see that in other people, we naturally respond too. It's the way we are. It's the way we're made. So it is a great cure for loneliness, at least temporarily. And the more you cultivate that mind, I think the more we can overcome the self-centered thought that's making us think that we're all alone. Also, just connecting with people, I think, just connecting with people seems to help a lot. I know my own experience of going through a period of my life when I was feeling quite, I was grieving. I was quite bereft and feeling alone. And what I found is that if I went out and sat in a public place, Whole Foods was down the street for me, I could go get a coffee, and simply look at the people going through that grocery store and really look at them. Not just, be in the hurry, but go to study them. It's a good thing to do this in airports too. Study the people walking by. Look at their faces. Look at how their bodies are. No matter what they're wearing or all the things you can get jealous about. Well, that's an expensive watch. I don't have. Not there. But the mind that looks and sees every human being is carrying the pain of being human in our faces. And to stop, look, and then begin to do the Tonglen practice, the taking of giving, just with the people we see right in front of us. I think it becomes really clear that everybody is walking around with a broken heart. Everybody's walking around with a self-centered mind that's trying to pull itself into its own loneliness and misery. And that by doing that really brilliant practice of taking on the suffering of others and giving them all of our merit, all of our goodness, all of our happiness, completely changes our own mind. Completely. And I think gives us a different place of where we are in the world. This incarcerated fellow had some really interesting things to say about his loneliness. He said, if I hadn't been full of ignorance, I would have searched my own mind for the source of my loneliness and also for the solution. Instead, I saw the solutions to unhappiness as being outside of myself, not very logical. It's kind of funny that I would end up going to prison where people are stacked on top of each other, where there is no privacy or solitude, no alone time at all. But then he says, of course, I don't feel alone or loneliness anymore since I started practicing the Dharma. I'm never alone now. I know that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, those who are constantly aware of me. Another antidote to our own loneliness. He said, my own imperfection prevents me from seeing them, but I'm working on that. I do see the results of their wisdom and their compassion. Also, I'm joined by an ocean of animals, human beings, and others jointly experiencing suffering due to our habitual disturbing attitudes. We are never alone. We have responsibility to each and every one of these living beings to quit harming them. We have a responsibility to work towards wisdom, the awareness that will allow us to benefit others through miraculous, compassionate means, each specific to the individual suffering. So, in truth, if I ever start to feel down on myself or think this practice is too hard, I think reading the writings of the inmate practitioners is a really good antidote. They are so wise in their experience, and they are practicing in an environment I can't even imagine how that would be. So, in this holiday season or in this retreat time when we're feeling alone, in retreat, look at the people around you. Just look. It's so lovely, actually, to be sharing the Dharma in that community. And we can see, I think, in the silence, it's our own mind that shuts us out from all the people that we're sharing this experience with. So in a way, that one's kind of easy to shift out of. If you're out in the larger society and there are Christmas carols going on and you don't do Christmas, or you're Jewish and never did Christmas, or and no one's invited you to their parties, or you don't want to go to their parties, but you don't want to be alone, all of those kinds of things. There are other ways to be involved with our alone. But the main point is that we have to look inside ourselves. Then going to the Youth Emergency Services Christmas party and offering gifts becomes an act of generosity. On Christmas Day, going down to the shelter, what's the name of the main one downtown in Spokane, making sure that all the homeless people are getting fed, that becomes a practice of generosity. We can share all that we have with others, physically, literally, or in our own mind. And as His Holiness says, at the very least, we can go out and walk and smile down the street and really rejoice in the smiles that come back to us. So may we really use our practice to benefit others in that way, and at the same time to heal this misconception that we are alone, that we have no help, that nobody loves us, that people are trying to harm us. It's not true. So may all beings be happy, and may we be very clear that it's our wish to bring beings to that state.
I think one of the very simple but profound teachings that Venerable gives over and over again, particularly during the retreats, is that she says it's a wonderful opportunity to become friends with yourself.
Yeah.
And I just never kind of grok that, but this whole practice of self-acceptance and true compassion, love for oneself, if you can't be with yourself and be okay and be really content with being who you are, it's a hard place to sort of extend beyond that. So I think making that a part of the practice as an antidote to loneliness is to really get to know ourselves on lots of different levels, but to be really happy with how we're kind of turning out, and to have some self-acceptance about who that person is.
Yeah.
I think another important factor is to turn off the internet. And you mentioned it, but you mentioned it connecting with people, but really turning off the internet. Even so we may be connected with communities in the internet, still it's a difference to really be with people, to talk directly to people, to hear them. And this way also, like compassion needs to be acted out. It's not just in our mind. We can't just have it within. Compassion is there to be acted out. So we have to connect with others.
Yeah. So over the last year of, traveling by myself for a few months and then dropping out of college and then quitting all of my jobs and volunteer positions, I really separated myself from all of my identities and old friends and even some of the new friends. And I also deleted most of my social media accounts. And so it's been like a challenge of working with the sense of loneliness that has come up. And then being here for almost 2 months now, it's been really something that I've had to work on. Is this feeling of loneliness and like isolation, but I've chosen to isolate myself, and I have to kind of remember that, and it's good. And remembering that I always have like my refuge with me in the 3 jewels, and like the antidote's been very powerful in working through some of the loneliness that I've been working through being here in the last few months. So thank you for sharing.
On Thursday, I went into the hospital and I was sitting in the little waiting room in radiology. And there was an old man in there who started talking to me. And he didn't have a very positive view. He said, I hate these places. I said, well, it's good they're here sometimes, isn't it? And he started talking to me about he lives in Montana. I don't know why he's over here. But he said, I don't like people. He said, oh, beard's starting to grow back in my hair. The radiation fell out, and they're not going to recognize me up there in the hills, and they're going to shoot me. And he said, I work with 2 guys, and I have a little mining claim, and I just see those 2 guys. And yet, here he was. He started the conversation. He obviously wanted to talk to me. I kind of been thinking about him a little bit. And I think that he might be lonely and not even know it. Mm. And it's definitely self-induced from having this attitude of not seeing the kindness of others and just, it's pretty sad, I thought. But I was friendly to him.